Hey guys, welcome back to another week of US cyber history. So this week we're going to dive right into things, but before I do, just keep in mind we're wrapping up the unit. Next week we'll have an assessment based on everything that we've studied so far. So what is that we've studied? We've looked at the progressive era in general, just things socially that changed. Women gained the right to vote. African American leaders were looking at different ways of gaining rights. We looked at some of the events, the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. We looked at the muckrakers and how they exposed the different issues, guys like Upton Sinclair, who wrote The Jungle, right? So all of that is going on during this time period. What we haven't looked at is the White House and politics during this time period. So that's what we're going to dive into today. In particular, we're going to look at Teddy Roosevelt. All right. So Roosevelt is pretty fascinating as a president, mainly because of who he was. He's a war hero. He was the governor of New York. He was the assistant secretary to the Navy. He just lived this crazy life, right? He was this larger than life figure, and he ultimately becomes president because of the assassination of this guy, President McKinley, who was running for re-election in 1900. They put Roosevelt on as the vice presidential candidate to help him get elected. So as a result, in 1901, Teddy Roosevelt takes over. There's an illustration here of the assassination that occurred in Buffalo, New York. This guy, Leon Kolgosh, was the assassin, walks up with a revolver in his hands at a meet and greet and shoots McKinley. McKinley lives for about a month, and then he passes away. Roosevelt is sworn in. So again, what was going on during this time period in the United States, right? We already looked at all this. The life expectancy was really low, no running water, things like that. The conditions in the workplace, child labor, unsafe work conditions, all of that is going on. So people want change, and it begins with Roosevelt. So Roosevelt himself, youngest president ever, not the youngest ever elected, but the youngest president ever. You can see all his background there. We're going to go through that in more detail in the coming weeks. This quote, "The man in the arena," really embodies Roosevelt. That's why I included it here. I'm going to post this slideshow. You guys should take a look at it. It's a great quote. He gets involved in the coal miner strike. Why is this significant? He's the first president to do so. So he's changing the presidency. He's the first president to get involved in a union dispute, mainly because if the workers, coal mine workers, go on strike, it's going to shut the country down. People heated their homes with coal. So he gets both sides to come to an agreement. And here's a picture of these guys at the White House in 1902. He also creates the Interstate Commerce Commission, which oversees trade between states. But ultimately, what we need to focus on, and that's what we're going to dive into this week, is Roosevelt the Trust Buster. So in order to understand what he does as a trust buster, we need to understand what a trust is. A trust is an organization of board of directors who oversee the stocks of common companies. So let's say in this case, the Northern Securities case, there were 4 railroad companies, all independent of each other, but came together to form a trust. And that board of directors then oversees and looks out for the common good of the trust. In some cases, they're looking out just for the companies and not for the consumer. In this case, that means there's good trust and bad trust. Roosevelt viewed the bad trust as those trusts like Northern Securities that were jacking up prices for consumers and raising prices because they had a monopoly. So he viewed that as a bad trust. Good trusts were those trusts that, although they formed this sort of monopoly, they still kept the competitive nature of the market and looked out for the better good of the consumer. Okay, so just understand what a trust is. Also, Roosevelt's responsible for helping pass the Meat Inspection Act. Hopefully we make the connection there to the jungle, right? So all of that is part of what Roosevelt does while he's in office. He's a guy that's not going to go away. When we get to the next unit, the Spanish-American War, we'll see Roosevelt again with the Rough Riders. So this week, what we're focusing on is Teddy Roosevelt in particular and politics during that time period. I will post a few assignments that you're going to be looking at that deal with trust busting and also the election of 1912. The election of 1912 is interesting. It's the first time a third-party candidate influences the outcome of the election. So you're going to do a read with some questions on that, real simple, but to give you the gist of it, right? Roosevelt comes out of quote unquote retirement to run again in 1912. He fills out for McKinley's term from 1901 to 1904. He is elected in 1904. So he's really only served one term, even though he's filled out McKinley's term. It's technically he's only been elected to one. So he runs for election again in 1912, only to impact the outcome of the election. Had he not run for president, Taft would have won for the Republicans. So you're going to read about that as a third party candidate and how they can impact the election. They steal votes away from one party and split those votes. It allows the other party, in this case, the Democrats and Woodrow Wilson, to win the election. All right. So we're going to take a look at both those issues this week. Should be fairly simple. Again, next week will be the culminating assessment, if you want to call it that. It'll be a free response type of question that you'll need to do on your own. So I'll talk about that next week. But this week, we're going to focus on politics. All right. Hope you guys are having a great week. And again, if you're having issues, I know some of you have reached out with tech issues. That seems to be the biggest thing. If you're having tech issues, reach out and I will try to help you through it. Okay. I'll see you next week.